My name is Renata Solís, and I was 34 years old the night I found a prepaid phone in my husband's winter coat and understood, in the space of about 4 seconds, that my entire marriage had been a managed performance, not an affair. I want to say that up front because that's where everyone's mind goes, and that's where mine went too, for about 6 hours. The truth was worse than an affair. An affair is a thing a man does to a marriage. What Daniel had done was build the marriage itself on top of a secret so large that when it finally surfaced, it didn't just crack us. It cracked everything I thought I knew about family, about loyalty, about the quiet agreements people make when they decide to love someone. The prepaid phone was the door. What was behind it was a room I am still, 2 years later, learning to stand inside. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. If you have ever looked at someone you loved completely and realized you were looking at a stranger, stay with me. This one will take your breath away. Daniel and I met in Chicago on the Red Line, the way people in this city like to say they meet accidentally, inconveniently between stops. He was standing with a paperback folded back on itself, the kind of reading that means you don't care about the spine, and I asked him what it was. He told me. I hadn't read it. He looked at me like that was interesting rather than a gap, and by the time we reached my stop we had exchanged numbers. We dated for 2 years. We were married in October at a restaurant in Pilsen with string lights and his mother's tamales and 40 people who loved us. I wore my grandmother's earrings. Daniel cried at the altar in the way that makes everyone in the room feel something. I thought I knew him. I had met his family, his mother, Graciela, a compact and watchful woman who ran an alterations shop in Little Village and always seemed to be measuring something that wasn't fabric. His younger sister, Pilar, warm and loud and easy to love. His father had died before I met Daniel, a car accident when Daniel was 19, and Daniel spoke of him with the particular careful grief of someone who had organized their pain into a box and learned not to open it in company. We had been married 4 years when I found the phone. For years that I had believed, completely and without suspicion, were honest. They were not. It was February, the kind of Chicago February that makes you understand why people leave. I was pulling Daniel's coat from the closet to take to the dry cleaner, a thing I had done a dozen times, and the phone fell out of the inside pocket and skidded across the hardwood floor and landed face up under the radiator.
It was a cheap thing.
The kind you buy at a drugstore with cash. The kind that has one purpose, and that purpose is to not be found. I picked it up. I sat on the floor with my back against the closet door, and I held it for a long time before I turned it on. There were text messages, dozens of them, going back at least a year. All to and from a single number saved under a single initial.
G.
I read them with the particular focus of a woman whose body already knows something her brain is still refusing to confirm. They were not romantic. They were not what I had braced for. They were logistical, careful, coded in the way of people who have been keeping a secret for so long they no longer notice how strange the language sounds. One message from Daniel. She doesn't know about the account.
Keep it that way.
One from G. Pilar is asking questions again. I told her what we discussed. One from Daniel, the most recent, 3 weeks ago. When this is settled, we can stop all of this.
Just hold on.
G. Graciela. His mother. My husband had a secret prepaid phone that he used exclusively to communicate with his mother, and together they were keeping something from me that involved an account and Pilar asking questions, and something that needed to be settled. I put the phone in my coat pocket. I sat on the floor for another hour. Then I got up, made coffee, and started thinking like the person I had been before I became Daniel's wife, the person who had worked 7 years as a contracts analyst and knew that the most dangerous secrets are always the ones that come with their own paper trail. Here is what I knew about our finances, or thought I knew. Daniel was a project manager for a mid-sized construction company. He made good money, not extraordinary, but good. I was a contracts analyst, also good. We had a joint checking account, a joint savings account, a mortgage on our 2-bedroom in Wicker Park that we had bought together 2 years before. We split everything evenly. I paid the bills every month from the joint account. I had never seen a number that didn't add up. But I had also, I now understood, only ever seen what Daniel had said in front of me. I did not go through his files that night. I was not ready to know everything at once, and I was smart enough to understand that whatever I was walking into, I needed to walk in carefully. I called my friend Yolanda instead. She was a CPA and the most unsentimental person I knew, and I told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Renata, don't touch anything. Don't move any money. Don't let him know what you know. And on Monday, you and I are going to sit down, and I'm going to show you how to request every financial record that has your name on it." I said, "What if my name isn't on it?" She said, "Then that's your answer." I put the phone back in Daniel's coat pocket. I hung the coat back in the closet. I made dinner. Daniel came home at 6:30 and kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day, and I told him about the meeting I'd had and the contract I'd reviewed, and I watched his face for the man I thought he was. He was a very good actor. Or I had simply never known what to look for. Yolanda spent 3 days teaching me to look. We pulled my credit report first. My name, my social security number, everything attached to me. It was clean, no surprises, no unknown accounts. Whatever Daniel was doing, he had been careful not to use my identity directly. Then we looked at the joint accounts. All of it looked normal at the surface. But Yolanda showed me something I had never noticed in 4 years of paying bills. A recurring transfer every month, $800, going to an account number I didn't recognize. It had been there since the month we got married. 48 transfers. $38,400. I stared at the number for a long time. $38,000 had left our joint account over 4 years, and I had never once noticed because it was always there, always the same amount, always on the same day, hidden inside a month's worth of normal transactions like a stone in deep water. The destination account was not a joint account. It was not in Daniel's name. Yolanda worked a contact at a title company, and what came back 3 days later made the floor tilt under me. The account was a property account for a condo on the northwest side of the city, in the name of Renata Solís. Daniel had been paying his mother's mortgage for 4 years out of our shared money, without telling me. $38,000. Our money. Her mortgage. And not one word. I could have stopped there. $38,000 is enough. $38,000 transferred without consent from a joint marital account is enough to walk into a lawyer's office and have a very clear conversation. But I am a contracts analyst. I read the whole document. I follow every reference to its source. And something in the message on that phone, "When this is settled, we can stop all of this," told me that the mortgage payments were not the whole story. I asked Yolanda to find out when Graciela had bought the condo. 6 years ago. 2 years before Daniel and I got married. I asked her to find out how it had been purchased.
Cash.
Full price. No mortgage at the time of purchase. I sat with that. If Graciela had bought the condo outright in cash 6 years ago, why had there been mortgage payments for the last 4 years? Where had the original mortgage come from? Yolanda pulled the lien history on the property. A home equity line of credit had been opened against the condo 2 months before Daniel and I got married. The borrower was Graciela. The amount was $220,000. $220,000 borrowed against a condo that had been paid off 2 months before our wedding. I thought about our wedding, the restaurant in Pilsen, the string lights, the 40 people, the catering, the flowers, the dress, the honeymoon in Portugal that Daniel had insisted on and planned entirely himself and told me was his wedding gift to us. I thought about the down payment on our Wicker Park condo 2 years after that, which Daniel had also handled, which I had signed papers for without looking as carefully as I should have because I trusted him and because I was in love and because that is the tax that love levies on the careful. I pulled the closing documents on our condo from my own files. I had a copy. I had always had a copy. I had just never read every line. The down payment had come from a gift, documented as a gift, the way mortgage lenders require, from Graciela Solís. Graciela had gifted us $60,000 for our down payment. Money she had borrowed from her own home against a line of credit she had opened 2 months before our wedding. And then for 4 years, Daniel had been quietly paying that line of credit back out of our joint account, $800 a month, without ever telling me where the money was going or why. He had borrowed money from his mother to fund our life together. The wedding in Pilsen. He had let me believe the honeymoon in Portugal was a gift. The condo and then he had been secretly repaying all of it built on a debt I didn't know existed, without my knowledge or consent. I didn't know was leaving. I want to tell you who Graciela was to me before I tell you what she had done. Because the cruelest part of this is not the money. The cruelest part is that I had loved her. She had been the mother-in-law women warn each other about in the abstract, and I had been given one who felt, genuinely, like a gift. She brought food when I was sick. She called me on my birthday, before she called Daniel. When my own mother had her hip replaced, Graciela sat with her at the hospital for 4 hours without being asked. I had told my friends, more than once, that I had won the mother-in-law lottery. She had been measuring something that wasn't fabric. I understand that now. She had not been generous. She had been strategic. Every kindness had been an investment in making sure I never looked too closely at the books. Every phone call, every pot of soup, every 4 hours in a hospital waiting room had been a stitch in a net designed to keep me from pulling the thread that would unravel the whole thing. I don't know if that's true. I will never know, entirely, if that's true. It is possible she loved me genuinely and also used me deliberately, and that both things coexisted in her without contradiction, the way complicated people contain contradictions. But I know what she did, and I know she did it on purpose. And I know she never told me. I did not confront Daniel the night I put all of it together. I had learned from years of contract work that you do not walk into a negotiation before you know your position completely. I was not ready. I needed one more thing. I needed to know if Pilar knew. Pilar and I had lunch every few weeks, a standing thing we had built ourselves, apart from Daniel, the kind of friendship that belongs to the women rather than the marriage. I called her and asked if she could meet me at the cafe on Milwaukee where we always went. She came in bright and cold from the February street and unwound her scarf and ordered her usual and looked at my face and stopped.
What happened? She said.
Not a question. I told her. All of it. The phone. The transfers. The line of credit. The down payment. The 4 years of $800 a month. Pilar sat very still, which was not like her. She was a woman who moved when she felt things, hands, shoulders, the tilt of her head. She sat completely still and stared at her coffee cup, and I watched something move across her face that was not surprise.
You knew, I said.
She looked up. Not all of it. I knew about the loan. I didn't know he was paying it from your account.
She paused.
I thought he had a separate account. I asked him about it last year. He told me it was handled. I let it go because she stopped. Because I let it go. And I shouldn't have. She reached across the table and held my hands. Her eyes were full. Renata, I am so sorry. What he did was wrong. What my mother did was wrong. And I am sorry I didn't push harder when I knew something wasn't right. I had come to that cafe prepared to lose everything. Daniel, Graciela, the marriage, the life. I had not been prepared for Pilar. For the way she sat across from me and chose me over the family story without hesitating. Some losses give you something back you didn't know you needed. Pilar is still one of my closest friends. That is the one clean thing that came out of all of it. I told Daniel on a Sunday. I had chosen Sunday deliberately. No work, nowhere to be. No exit that didn't require a scene. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I laid the bank statements and the lien history and the closing documents out in 3 columns, the way I lay out a contract dispute, and I waited for him to sit down. He looked at the papers before he looked at me. That told me everything. He didn't deny it. That surprised me and didn't at the same time. Daniel was not, at his core, a liar. He was a man who had made a decision years ago to manage a problem quietly rather than honestly, and who had kept managing it, month after month, hoping it would resolve itself before I ever found out. That is not the same thing as lying, and it is not better. He said his mother had needed help, that she had borrowed the money to give us a real start, that he had wanted to repay her without making me feel indebted to her, that he had thought of it as protecting me from an obligation that wasn't mine to carry. I listened to all of it. I let him finish. Then I said, Daniel, you took $38,000 from our shared account over 4 years and sent it somewhere without telling me. That is not protection. That is not managing a problem. That is making a financial decision about my money without my knowledge and calling it love so it sounds better. He was quiet for a long time. I said, the money I can survive. What I cannot survive is that you looked at me every day for 4 years and decided I didn't need to know. That you trusted your mother with the truth and didn't trust me with it. That's not a mistake, Daniel. That's a choice. And you made it over and over again. He cried. And I had loved this man enough to cry at an altar in Pilsen, and I sat at that kitchen table and watched him cry and felt something in me that was not anger and not grief, but the particular cold clarity of a woman who has finally seen the whole picture and understands exactly what it means. It meant I had never been his partner. I had been his project. Something to be managed, protected from discomfort, kept comfortable enough that I would not look too closely at the edges. I was 34 years old. I had 7 years of contract experience and a very good eye for the places where language becomes evasion. And I had spent 4 years inside a marriage that was structured to keep me from using any of it. Not anymore. I want to be precise here because precision is what protects you. In Illinois, transfers from a joint marital account without the knowledge or consent of both account holders can constitute dissipation of marital assets. $38,000, documented, recurring, directed to a third party, in this case, Graciella's home equity line of credit. Over 4 years of marriage is not a gray area. It is a clear line. My attorney, a woman named Frances Adu, who wore reading glasses on a chain and had the calm of someone who had heard every version of every family story and was not surprised by any of them, called it straightforward. The money is documentable, she said. The account records show every transfer. The lien history shows where it went. The closing documents show how it originated. This is not a he said she said situation. This is a paper trail. She filed for a dissipation claim in the divorce proceedings. The $38,000 was treated as a marital asset that had been unilaterally diverted, and the division of our remaining assets was adjusted accordingly. Daniel did not fight it. I think he had known from the Sunday morning at the kitchen table that fighting it would require him to argue in front of a judge that secretly paying his mother's debt from our shared account for 4 years was reasonable. There is no version of that argument that survives contact with the courtroom. Graciella, through her own attorney, offered to repay a portion. Frances told me to take it, not out of generosity, but out of efficiency, because the alternative was a longer fight for a number that wouldn't change my life materially. I took it. I did not feel grateful. The divorce was finalized 11 months after the Sunday at the kitchen table. I kept the condo. Daniel moved out and eventually moved to a 2-bedroom in Logan Square, closer to his mother's place, which I suppose was always where the gravity was pulling him. Here is what nobody tells you about discovering a betrayal that isn't dramatic. There is no villain with a mustache. There is no moment where the wrongdoer breaks down and confesses their wickedness. There is just a man who loved his mother more than he respected his wife, and a mother who let him, and 4 years of quiet monthly transfers that nobody was ever supposed to see. Daniel was not a monster. He was a man who had grown up watching his father leave his mother financially precarious and had decided, somewhere deep and unexamined, that his job was to fix it, and that fixing it quietly was better than fixing it honestly, because honesty would require conversations he didn't know how to have. Graciella was not a monster either. She was a woman who had raised her children alone on alterations work and had grabbed a lifeline when her son offered it, and had told herself the story that made it acceptable, the way frightened people do. Understanding that did not make it hurt less. It made it hurt differently. Cleaner, maybe. The kind of hurt that comes from seeing clearly rather than from being blindsided. What broke me, in the end, was not the money. It was a night about 2 months after he moved out, when I was going through the kitchen and found, at the back of a drawer, a photograph from our wedding. String lights. His face at the altar. My grandmother's earrings. I held it for a long time. Then I put it back in the drawer because it was still true that that day had happened, and that I had loved him, and that some things can be real and wrong at the same time without canceling each other out. I live alone in the Wicker Park condo now. I repainted the bedroom a color Daniel would not have chosen, and I stay up as late as I want, and I make coffee exactly as strong as I like it, and sometimes that is enough. I am careful with money in a way I was not before. Not fearful, careful. There is a difference. I read every document I sign. I ask questions that might seem tedious to people who have never found a prepaid phone in a coat pocket. I do not apologize for the questions. Yolanda checks in every few months. Pilar and I still have lunch on Milwaukee, still our standing thing, still ours in a way that belongs to the women and not the marriage. She told me last spring that Daniel had started therapy, which I received as information and not as a feeling. I did not hate him, in the end. I had loved him too completely to arrive at hatred from the other side. What I had was something colder and more permanent, a clear understanding of what I had been inside that marriage, and a decision that I would never be managed again by someone who called it love. My name is Renata Solís. I found a prepaid phone in a coat pocket on a February night in Chicago and followed it all the way to the truth. The truth was not what I expected. It never is. But it was mine, finally, completely, every documented line of it, and no one could fold it back up and put it in a pocket and hope I never looked. The quietest record outlasts the longest silence. And $38,000, transferred month after month in the dark, leaves a very clear record indeed. That is my story. A coat pocket, a prepaid phone, and the 4 years of paper that told me everything my husband had decided I didn't need to know. If this reminded you to read every line of every document you sign, do it. Not because everyone is lying, but because love is not a reason to stop paying attention. It is a reason to pay closer. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs it, and I'll see you in the next one.